අද්විතීය 200 Mbps ස්පීඩ් එකකින් ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ වේගවත්ම සහ පුළුල්තම හෝම් බ්‍රෝඩ්බෑන්ඩ් සම්බන්ධතාවය වන SLT Mobitel දේශීය ෆයිබර් බලවේගය ඔබත් අදම අත්විඳින්න.
හරිම සුදුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Monday, the 11th of September 2023. Right human rights. The United Nations Human Rights Council urges the government to probe the Easter Sunday attacks in line with international standards. New school. The health minister announces the establishment of 3 private medical colleges to supplement the country's health sector. Rain wanes. The Met Department forecasts a reduction in heavy rainfalls to reduce from today.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දෙනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසින් ලබාගත හැක.
Rhino Cement Roofing Sheets. හොඳම මෙලට කල් පවතින වහරයක්.
This is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and a warm welcome to today's edition of AdaDerana's English News First at 9. This is Jonathan Benedict. Let's take a look at our top story for the evening. The United Nations Human Rights Council called on the Sri Lankan government to conduct investigations related to the 2019 Easter Sunday attacks with adherence to international standards. During the 54th regular session of the United Nations Human Rights Council, which commenced in Geneva today, the UN Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, Nada al-Nashif, said that investigations should also consist of the participation of victims and their representatives. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka's permanent representative to the UN office in Geneva, Himali Arunatilaka, announced the objection of the Sri Lankan government towards the report, stating that the report hardly highlights the actual situation in Sri Lanka.
The 54th regular session of the United Nations Human Rights Council commenced in Geneva today. During the session, the report on the human rights status in Sri Lanka prepared by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights was taken up for review.
The international community, including international financial institutions, should keep supporting Sri Lanka in its recovery in line with obligations around international cooperation and assistance by providing the fiscal space needed while pressing for genuine progress in governance, transparency and accountability. The economic hardship, the tensions around economic and structural reform policies and the delay of local elections continue to give rise to protests. The report provides an analysis of concerns with some forthcoming legislation, in particular the proposed anti-terrorism bill that will replace the Prevention of Terrorism Act and the new law to regulate media broadcasting. It urges a moratorium on the use of the PTA in the meantime and for the review of long-standing PTA cases to be expedited. The report recognizes the initiatives of the government to advance reconciliation, including its proposal for a new truth-seeking mechanism. However, it also stresses that urgent confidence-building steps are needed to create an environment in which a genuine reconciliation and transitional justice processes can succeed. The report recommends that the government accelerate investigations and prosecutions in emblematic cases of human rights violations, including the Easter Sunday bombings, in compliance with international human rights standards. The High Commissioner has repeatedly recommended that the government of Sri Lanka should establish a follow-up, independent and transparent investigation into the Easter Sunday attacks with international assistance and the full participation of victims and their representatives.
Following the remarks of the UN Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, Sri Lanka's permanent representative to the United Nations in Geneva, Himali Arunatilaka, expressed Sri Lankan government's objection to the report.
The government of Sri Lanka has consistently rejected resolutions 46/1 and 51/1 that led to the setting up of the so-called accountability project. We also reject the written update, its conclusions and recommendations. We recall that the majority of member states either opposed or abstained from voting on these resolutions in fundamental disagreement with their unacceptable content, in particular the so-called evidence gathering mechanism, the establishment of which is unprecedented. We reiterate that it goes beyond the mandate that member states conferred on the Council by UNGA Resolution 60/251. These resolutions are intrusive and polarizing and upheld only by a handful of countries for reasons unrelated to human rights and based on their vote bank domestic politics. Therefore, Sri Lanka will not cooperate with it. However, as an active participant of the multilateral framework and in keeping with our close engagement with the international community and the Council in other areas of its work, Sri Lanka will continue to engage constructively with other mechanisms of the Council that have been productive and beneficial to our people, such as the UPR process. The content of the written update does not reflect the actual situation in Sri Lanka. The economic, social and financial stabilization Sri Lanka has achieved in the past year has been appreciated and acknowledged domestically and externally. Those who are mandated and have the expertise to deal with economic and financial reforms remain confident in the country's prospects. It is also regrettable that the OHCHR has chosen to ignore the democratic resilience of the country and its institutions.
Later, country representatives expressed their views on the report on Sri Lanka prepared by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
We take note of plans for reconciliation mechanisms and the President's dialogue with Tamil political parties, as well as the promise to stop land acquisitions for archaeological, forestry or security purposes. However, these still need to be turned into concrete actions. We call upon Sri Lanka to suspend the Prevention of Terrorism Act.
We note preparations for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission and emphasise the importance of an inclusive participatory process in the establishment of any mechanisms to advance transitional justice, to gain the confidence of all affected communities in line with international best practices. As Sri Lanka takes forward its economic recovery, we stress the importance of effective governance reforms and note the recent anti-corruption legislation. This must be accompanied by safeguarding established independent institutions and democratic processes.
We recognize Sri Lanka's strengthened reforms, including anti-corruption legislation. We remain concerned about tensions at religious sites and minority communities and the absence of local elections since 2018. We encourage meaningful consultations in finalizing the Anti-Terrorism Act and hope these discussions help bring the law into alignment with international best practices.
Canada continues to stress the importance of inclusive transitional justice that includes a focus on accountability for human rights violations, an end to impunity, and a commitment to reconciliation. We acknowledge that Sri Lanka is developing legislation to replace the PTA and urge Sri Lanka to ensure the legislation is consistent with its international human rights commitments. Canada remains concerned that relevant sections of the Penal Code unjustly target same-sex couples and calls on Sri Lanka to repeal these harmful sections.
Moving to news at home, Minister of Health Keheli Rambukwala says that malnutrition levels have dropped in 2023, according to the latest report done by the Ministry of Health. The minister confirmed that there has been a 0.5% drop in figures compared to 2017. Speaking to a media briefing held today, the minister then switched topic and addressed the brain drain in the country and said that several proposals have been submitted to increase the number of recruits to professions within the sector to address this concern. He further said that 3 new private medical colleges will be established to supplement the medical industry with more practitioners.
බොහොම තරලෙස කතා කරනවානේ මේ බෙහෙත් හිඟේ සම්බන්ධව. ඒ වගේම මේ තමයි නියුට්‍රිෂන් මන්ත් මේ අවුරුද්දේ අපි කරපු පරීක්ෂණවල වාර්තාව. ඒ වාර්තාවේ හැටියට මන්ද පෝෂණය 50%කින් වැඩි වෙලා කියලා කෑ ගැහුවානේ. 2002 ඉඳන් සලකලා ගත්තොත් අපි 2021ත් එක්ක බලනකොට 1.6ක වර්ධනයක් වෙලා තියෙනවා. තා දරුණු ලෙස මන්ද පෝෂණයට භාජනය වෙච්ච 1.8යි 2017 2023 1.2කට අඩු වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඒ නිසා ඒ තත්ත්වය පෙන්වන්න උත්සාහ කරන තරම් දරුණු තත්ත්වයක් නෙමෙයි. තාමත් හොඳ තැනකට ගෙනහලා තියෙනවා.
The UNICEF එකෙන් කියලා තියෙන මෙහෙම දෙයක්. 2.3 million children in Sri Lanka don't have enough to eat.
තාමත්ම තිචෝක්තියෙන් මවලා පෙන්නන දැන් අර ඔබතුමාට උනත් තිබ්බ මතය තමයි මේ UNICEF එකෙන් කියන කතාවනේ කියලා. UNICEF එකත් මම අභියෝගයට ලක් කරා. මොකද UNICEF එක එක වෙලාවක 2015 ගණන් ටික කිව්වා 2022. ඒක ඒ කට්ටිය පිළිගත්තා.
මතුමා දැන් එතකොට සෞඛ්‍ය අංශයේ කිසිම ප්‍රශ්නයක් නැද්ද?
මම ඒක නේ කිව්වේ ප්‍රශ්න ගොඩක් තියෙනවා කියලා.
කලින් අවුරුද්දට සාපේක්ෂව දැන් ප්‍රශ්න වැඩි වෙලා අඩු වෙලා.
අඩු වෙලා.
මේ ඔක්කොම සෝෂල් මීඩියා එකෙන්ද කරන්නේ.
සෝෂල් මීඩියා කියන්නේ දේශපාලන වමනාව නෙවෙයි කරන දේවල්.
මේ වෛද්‍යවරු රට හැර යාමක වළක්වා ගැනීමට මොකක් හරි වැඩපිළිවෙල කලුත් නීතිම පැත්තක් එහෙම තියෙනවා.
වෛද්‍යවරුන් සහ සමස්ත බුද්ධිකලනය සෞඛ්‍ය ක්ෂේත්‍රයේ යම් කිසි විදිහේ අඩුපාඩුවකින් සිදු වෙන දෙයක් නෙමෙයි. මේ වෙනකොට මම යෝජනා කරලා තියෙන්නේ අපි යම් යම් ක්ෂේත්‍රවලට ගන්න ප්‍රමාණයන් වැඩි කළ යුතුයි. අපේ දැන් තියෙන 13ක් ෆැකල්ටිස්. ඒ 13ම ගත්තොත් ගන්නේ 2000ක් විතර ප්‍රමාණය. ඒ ප්‍රමාණය වැඩි කිරීමට හැකියාවක් තියෙනවා. මොකද වෙන රටකටන් C3කින් යන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ මූලික සුදුසුකම් තියෙන ළමයිට වෙන අවස්ථාවක් හරි දෙන්න ඕනේ. එංගලන්තය වගේ රටවල් විශේෂයෙන්ම අපේ වෛද්‍යවරුන් ගන්නේ අපේ ඩිග්‍රී එකට එහෙම සැලකිල්ලක් තියෙනවා. අපේ ඩිග්‍රී එක පාවිච්චි කරන්න බෑ.
පෞද්ගලික වෛද්‍ය විද්‍යාල 3ක් ආරම්භ කරනවා කියලා.
අපි බලලා තියෙනවා ඒ කට්ටියගේ කරිකියුලම් එක. ඒක අපේ තියෙන වෛද්‍ය විද්‍යාලයට සමාන්තර විය යුතුයි. ඉන්න මහාචාර්යවරුන් සියලු දෙනාම අපේ ලංකාවේ මෙඩිකල් ෆැකල්ටිස් වල උපදේශකයන් කතිකාචාර්යවරුන් හැටියට කටයුතු කරපු අය. ඒකේ අවම සුදුසුකම් මේවටත් දාලා තියෙනවා. ලංකාවේ මේ පිළිගත් වෛද්‍ය විද්‍යා පීඨවල කටයුතු කරන ආකාරය ඒ ආකාරයෙන්ම හෝ ඊට එහා මට්ටමකට තියන්නට ඕනේ කියන නීති රීති ටික ගෙනල්ලා තියෙනවා. මම ඉල්ලීමක් කළා තියෙනවා පෞද්ගලිකව ඒ කට්ටියගෙන් 10% ගෙතර ශිෂ්‍යත්ව ලබා දෙන්නයි කියලා. පල්ලේ කැලේ මේ වෙනකොට IT එකත් එක්ක එන එක අනිත් එක ලයිසියම් එකෙන් අනිත් එක ගේට්වේ.
Many areas in the country, including Colombo, have been affected by heavy rainfall today, and the Met Department expects inclement weather to continue in several areas tomorrow. However, the Met Department predicts that rainfall will decrease after today. Meanwhile, the Ceylon Electricity Board, with some electrifying good news, confirmed that hydropower generation in the island has increased up from 30% from 20% with the prevailing rains.
Prevailing inclement weather patterns continue to affect several areas in the country, including Colombo, since the early hours of today. The Met Department forecasted heavy rainfall in certain areas for tomorrow. In its forecast for tomorrow, the Met Department said that showers will occur in the western, Sabaragamuwa and northwestern provinces, and in the Kandy, Norelia, Galle and Mathura districts. Fairly heavy showers reaching 50 millimeters are likely at some places in the western and Sabaragamuwa provinces, and in the Puthalam, Galle and Mathura districts.
අද දිනේ වර්ෂාපතනයේ ප්‍රමාණාත්මක වැඩිවීමක් අපේක්ෂා කරනවා. මේ තත්ත්වය බොහෝ විට අපේක්ෂා කරන්නේ මේ තත්ත්වයේ තියෙන්නේ ඇත්තටම මේ දිනවල තියෙන දිවයිනේ නිදිග මෝසම් කාල පරිච්ඡේදයේ අවසාන තත්ත්වයයි. කෙසේ නමුත් අද දිනෙන් පස්සේ ගත්තම ප්‍රමාණාත්මකව මේ වර්ෂාපතනයේ අඩුවීමක් තමයි අපේක්ෂා කරන්නේ.
Taking the prevailing inclement weather into account, the National Building Research Organisation issued early landslide warnings to 4 districts in the island. Accordingly, Level 1 early landslide warnings were issued to areas in the Galle, Kalathura, Galle and Ratnapura districts. As heavy rainfall continued in the island, the Senior Engineers Association of the Ceylon Electricity Board confirmed that water levels of reservoirs which had dried up due to the drought have increased up to 33%. According to the Ceylon Electricity Board, hydropower generation, which was at below 20%, has increased up to 30%.
According to statistics issued by the National Dengue Control Unit, the number of dengue infections identified in the island for the month so far has exceeded 900. Nearly 50% of all cases identified so far are reportedly from the Western Province, with school children accounting for 50% or 20% rather of that number.
Due to prevailing inclement weather patterns, the number of cases identified within the first 10 days of September exceeded 900. According to the National Dengue Control Unit, 960 cases have been reported from the island so far this month. 38 dengue-related deaths were reported from the island. Nearly 50% of the dengue cases reported so far this year was from the Western Province. Meanwhile, school children accounted for 20% of the cases identified so far. With a total of 62,838 cases reported so far this year, the cumulative figures of cases reported from the Western Province stands at 30,555. The Central Province meanwhile recorded a total of 6,640 cases, with the Kandy district contributing 5,286 infections. According to the National Dengue Control Unit, 13 MOH areas remain at high risk for the virus.
Former Member of Parliament Mujibur Rahman commented on the reluctance of the SLPP to execute an international criminal investigation into the Easter attacks, adding that both the members and the supporters of the SLPP urged for the issue to be concluded. However, conversely, both the General Secretary of the SLPP, Sagara Karyavasam, and Member of Parliament Gamini Lokuge expressed their positive response towards an investigation into the matter. With that, let's delve into more thoughts from the world of Sri Lankan politics today.
සියලු දෙනාම කියන්නේ ජාත්‍යන්තර අපරාධ පරීක්ෂණයකට මේක ලක් කරන්න ඕනේ කියන එක. දැන් මේ පරීක්ෂණ සම්බන්ධව ඇතිදු ආකාරයේ සෑහීමකට පත් වෙන්න බෑයි කියන එක හැමදෙනාම පිළිගන්න. නමුත් අපිට පේනවා දැන් මේ පරීක්ෂණ ඕමනා නැහැ. මේක අන්තවාදී ක්‍රියාවක්. ඒ හින්දා අපි මේක මෙතනින් හමාර කරමුයි කියලා දැන් පොදු ජන පෙරමුණේ ඉන්න මැති ඇමතිවරු ඒගොල්ලන්ට පක්ෂ කණ්ඩායම් කියන්න පටන් අරන් තිබෙනවා.
අපි පක්ෂයක් හැටියට ඒක ගැන බලන්නේ ඕනේ කෙනෙකුට ඕනේ ජාත්‍යන්තර පරීක්ෂණයක් කළා ඒක හොයාගන්න පුළුවන් ඒක කිසි ප්‍රශ්නයක් නෑ. අනිත් එක පාස්කු ඉරිදා සිද්ධිය වෙනකොට අපි හිටියේ විපක්ෂේ. සජිත් ප්‍රේමදාස ආණ්ඩුවේ, රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහ ජනාධිපතිතුමා ආණ්ඩුවේ ඔය අද විපක්ෂයේ ඉන්න මැති ඇමතුරු තමයි එදා හිටියේ. සිලෙක්ට් කොමිටියට පත් වුණේ ඒගොල්ලෝ. එදා ඒගොල්ලන්ට ඒක කරන්න තිබුණා.
No action against TMVP leader පිල්ලයන් SLPP. මොකද්ද මේ කියන්නේ? අපි ක්‍රියාමාර්ග ගන්නෙ නෑ පොහොට්ටුව හැටියට පිල්ලයන්ට විරුද්ධව කියලා කියනවා. මේක මේ ජනමාධ්‍යයට කියලා මේක ඉස්සරහා පිටුවේ දාගන්න එපා. ඇයි හද්දෙයනේ මේක ජනමාධ්‍යයට දාපුවම මේක යනවන්නේ ජාත්‍යන්තරයට.
2018 පෙබරවාරි වෙනකොට අපි දන්නවා මීළඟ ජනාධිපතිවරණය අනිවාර්යෙන් ජයග්‍රහණය කරන්නේ ශ්‍රී ලංකා පොදු ජන පෙරමුණ. මීළඟ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ අනිවාර්ය බලය පිහිටවන්නේ ශ්‍රී ලංකා පොදු ජන පෙරමුණ කියලා. ඉතින් මෙවැනි තත්ත්වයක් තියාගෙන කවුරු හරි කියනවා නම් අපිට ඡන්දෙ දිනන්න වෙනත් කටයුතු වලට නියැලෙන්න ඕනි කියලා මං හිතන්නේ එහෙම කියන්නේ එක්ක බුද්ධියෙන් අඩු පුද්ගලයෙක් එහෙම නැත්නම් ඒ වගේ දෙයක් තේරුම් ගන්න බැරි පුද්ගලයෙක්. අපිත් පක්ෂයක් හැටියට ඉල්ලා සිටිනවා මේ සම්බන්ධයෙන් ජාත්‍යන්තරව හරි කමන්නේ මේක පරීක්ෂණයක් කරන්න කියන ඉල්ලීම.
A 4.65 magnitude tremor was reported in the northeast of Batticaloa earlier this morning. The tremor occurred at approximately 1:30 a.m. last morning, but thankfully posed no threat of a tsunami or any other catastrophe to Sri Lanka. In other human news, 10 million rupees worth of 4.5 million cigarettes was confiscated by Sri Lanka Customs following a tip-off from their Indian counterparts. With that, here's a look at that and more news from across the island in brief.
10 million rupees worth of 4.5 million cigarettes along with 2 suspects. The apprehension was executed following information received from the Central Intelligence Unit of Customs Department of India. The Sri Lanka Navy arrested 12 individuals engaged in illegal fishing during a special operation conducted in Trincomalee and the sea area of Chalai. The operation further led to the seizure of 4 dinghies, unauthorized fishing equipment and diving gear. The individuals engaged in the operations are identified as residents of Nilaveli, Trincomalee and Kinnia, ranging in the ages from 22 to 55 years of age.
ගොඩමඩ පෙරලි කරන බලපුළුවන්කාරයා මහින්ද්‍රා යුවෝ ටීමෝ වෙතින්. වැඩම ගොඩයි ගොඩම තමයි ස්වරාජ් ට්‍රැක්ටර් ටීමෝ වෙතින්.
Welcome back. Artists who showcased their talents in Sri Lankan cinema in 2022 were felicitated during the 8th edition of the Derana Lux Film Awards. The Best Picture Award was presented to the movie Alboroda, directed by Ashoka Handagama. With that, here are some highlights of the glamorous night.
The 8th edition of the Derana Lux Film Awards took place at the Nelumpokona Theatre in Colombo. The ceremony recognizes and celebrates the top talents of Sri Lankan cinema for the brilliance they showcased in 2022. A total of 25 awards, including 15 jury awards, 7 popular category awards and 3 awards themed Cinema of Tomorrow were presented to the artists. The Best Picture Award was presented to Alborada, directed by Ashoka Handagama.
Best Picture.
Best Picture is Alborada and my dear friend Handaya.
Ashoka Handagama was also presented with the Best Director and Best Screenplay Award.
22, Mr. Ashoka Handagama for his movie Alborada.
The Best Actor in a Leading Role was presented to Trey Hicks in the trilingual period movie Prana. Meanwhile, Urani Noshika, who starred in the action-packed thriller feature film Knight Rider, was presented with the award of Best Actress in a Leading Role. The Most Popular Actress Award was presented to Nayanthara Wickramaarachi. Rodney Varanakula was awarded Most Popular Actor in a Comedy Role, which was accepted by his daughter. The Most Popular Actor in a Negative Role was presented to Bimal Jayakodi. Among the films released in 2022, the award for the most popular song was given to the song Sevandipaya from the movie Adaraniya Prarthana. Renowned music artist Bhathiya Jayakodi and Santosh Sriraman, who performed the film's score, received awards. Meanwhile, the blockbuster movie of the year was presented to the movie Gindari. The award Cinema of Tomorrow Best Picture was presented to the movie Manel.
Special mention, ladies and gentlemen, all of his crew he worked with. Rupial million පහක් වටිනා චෙක් පත මේ අවස්ථාවේදී ආචාර්ය විසාකේස චන්ද්‍රසේකරන් මහතාට මනල් චිත්‍රපටය වෙනුවෙන් ලබා දෙනවා ඇති.
Meanwhile, the Cinema of Tomorrow Most Promising Director Award was presented to Jagat Manuwarna for Rahas Kiyana Kandu. The Best Short Film Award was presented to Tisen Umagiliya for the movie Distance. The Special Jury Award for the Best Short Film was presented to Kensington John for the movie Marcus.
Udishan Jonas joins us now with a few thoughts to round off our Market Outlook segment for this week.
Both the All-Share Price Index and S&P SL20 closed positive during last week, with the All-Share Price Index closing roughly about 309 points higher or 2.8% higher than the previous week. The turnover levels of the market dipped to about 1.1 billion rupees on average for a day, which was 40% lower than the previous week. Activity levels were reported higher on the tourism sector, as hotels are expected to see increased occupancy levels with the Asia Cup ongoing, higher bookings during the winter season, and also August numbers coming in at roughly about 140,000 arrivals for the month. The banking and finance sector took a small dive during the week, as the President's comments on further budget taxation kind of put in uncertainty among investors on the market. Haley's saw increased activity during the week, as the lower interest rates prompted investors to look at counters which would benefit from interest rate reduction, namely companies who are heavily exposed to higher leverage. On the debt side, we saw the Central Bank of Sri Lanka raising roughly about 140 billion rupees during the week on treasury bill auctions, of which 107 billion rupees came in from the 3-month treasury bills. Interest rates were almost flat, as the uncertainty surrounding the IMF meetings and the pending domestic debt finalization kept investors slightly away from the secondary markets. Going into this week, we expect the momentum to build in for the bonds, as tomorrow there is a 90 billion rupee auction for treasury bonds, which is expected to see some kind of improvement in terms of the yields subsequent to the conclusion of the bond program. And from an equity perspective, interest is expected to improve on the banking and finance counter and tourism sector counters this week.
Mixed feelings today as the Colombo bourse ended lower today, dragged down by a drop in financial and industrial stocks. The Colombo Stock Exchange All-Share Price Index closed down 0.69% at 11,386.73 points, while the S&P SL20 was down 0.82% at 3,221.82 points. Expo Lanka Holdings PLC and LOLC Holdings were the top losers on the index, falling 1.2% and 1.6% respectively. Trading volume on the index fell to 40.6 million shares from 43 million shares in the previous session. The equity market's turnover rose to 1.15 billion rupees from 1.14 billion rupees in the previous session. The consumer service sector was the top contributor to market turnover today, while the capital goods sector was the second highest contributor. Foreign investors were net buyers, purchasing stocks worth 58.1 million rupees, while domestic investors were net sellers, offloading shares worth 1.1 billion rupees. With that, let's take a look at how the rupee traded against other major currencies during the day. The Colombo Stock Exchange has revised the corporate governance rules applicable to listed entities. The CSE said that the revised rules will be effective from the 1st of October 2023. Meanwhile, Chairman of the Spice Council of Sri Lanka, Sarada De Silva, has been invited to address the World Spice Congress, which will be held in parallel with the G20 summit under Indian leadership. With that, let's take a look at more corporate news in brief.
Corporate governance rules applicable to listed entities enumerated in current Rule 7.10 and Section 9 of the listing rules of the Colombo Stock Exchange have been revised by the Colombo Stock Exchange, and the said amendments have been approved by the Securities and Exchange Commission of Sri Lanka. The revised corporate governance requirements, including rules governing the related party transactions, have been consolidated and incorporated as Section 9 of the Colombo Stock Exchange listing rules. The revised corporate governance rules set out in Section 9 of the listing rules will be effective from 1st of October this year, except to the extent stipulated in Rule 9.1.4 of the said rules. Meanwhile, the founder chairman of the Spice Council of Sri Lanka, Sarada De Silva, has been invited by the organisers of the World Spice Congress to deliver an address on Ceylon spices held from the 15th to the 17th of September this year in Navi Mumbai, Maharashtra in India. The Spice Conference is being held as a part of the G20 summit under Indian leadership. The World Spice Congress is attended by over 1,700 spice industry value chain actors and policymakers from both the public and private sector from all over the world. During the conference, there will be a meeting of International Organization of Spice Trading Associations to map up the further strategy to better coordination and interaction among spice associations from around the world to meet its challenges. In the meantime, the Colombo Stock Exchange is to introduce two new initiatives shortly: the regulated short selling through stock, borrowing and lending, which are aimed at enhancing trade opportunities and flexibility for investors. The stock borrowing and lending initiative by the CSE connects lenders and borrowers of shares for a predetermined period, allowing them to capitalize on market trends and enjoy prevailing interest rates. Only eligible securities specified by the CSE will be allowed for SBL transactions. The CSE is also introducing regulated short selling with checks and balances designed to address risk management and market stability in the short selling practices. Only the shares of specific listed companies meeting liquidity criteria will be eligible for regulated short selling. However, it will not be permitted for orders submitted by clients via internet.
I'm Jonathan Benedict. Have a blessed Tuesday ahead. For now, good night.